Hello everyone, I am Demented Kirby, and welcome to my channel, the Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews and other deck techs. On this episode of the Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from Core Set 2021, Gadrak the Crown-Scourge. If you like this deck or any of the cards I'll be mentioning throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. Other ways you can help support the channel is by Patreon. Patrons get early access to scheduled videos on YouTube, and higher tier patrons get access to the VIP section of my Discord server as well. You can find a link to that down in the description too. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Gadrak is a 5/4 dragon with flying for 2 generic and 1 red. It creates a treasure token at the beginning of your end step for each non-token creature that died that turn. So not only is Gadrak a huge beater, but it can also generate some mana acceleration. However, this would be too broken for 3 mana. This is why Gadrak can't attack unless you control 4 or more artifacts. This isn't that big a nerf anyway, since there are plenty of zero-costed artifacts, especially the Moxes, which we'll see soon, as well as artifact lands. This makes it very possible to cast Gadrak as early as turn 1 and start smashing face as early as turn 2. However, this build isn't just about smashing face with Gadrak, since getting treasures can really push us way further than the rest of the board, so we'll work on that too. Also, Gadrak is a cheap 5/4, which means that it's also great for crewing vehicles. So until you get artifacts online to use Gadrak to smash face, you can smash face with some vehicles too. First, let's see how we can get Gadrak online quickly. As I just mentioned, zero-costed artifacts are the way to go. Mox Diamond, Mox Opal, Mox Amber, and Mana Crypt. Obviously, these greatly boost your game, as well as getting out a fast Gadrak that also has the potential of attacking. Granted, these cards are very expensive for that very reason. At least Mana Crypt is getting yet another reprint in Double Masters, but you can also swap these out for more budget-friendly options if need be. Darksteel Citadel and Great Furnace are the other zero-costed artifacts, but they're not really spells and take up your land drop for the turn. Still, they help get an early game Gadrak while also helping it get online. Soul Ring and Mana Vault are the 1-drop rocks in the deck that can also accelerate the deck, as well as helping Gadrak get online too. Grim Monolith is also included, which is similar to Mana Vault but can be untapped whenever. It might cost 2 to cast, but being able to tap for 3 really helps casting our other artifacts. Again, if outside of your price range, you might consider the gold-bordered version of it. Cloud Key, Foundry Inspector, and Joyous Familiar help with reducing the cost of artifacts while also being artifacts themselves. Sure, you have to choose artifact with the key, but the deck is mostly artifacts anyways. Joyous Familiar also has the added bonus of reducing the cost of legendary spells, so it also makes Gadrak and the other legends of the deck cheaper to cast too. Ruby Medallion is another way to reduce casting costs, but it's limited to red spells, which isn't a problem since the cards that aren't colorless are red. It also only costs 2 to cast, so it can be cast before Gadrak to not only help Gadrak cost less, but also be cheaper to cast too. Extraplanar Lens is also helpful in getting the most of your snow-covered mountains, of which the deck has 20. Being able to make each of these tap down for 2 red is great at allowing us to cast a lot of spells per turn, but also fuel some of our game-ending plays, which we'll see soon enough. Dockside Distortionist isn't an artifact per se, but can create a ton of treasure tokens when it enters the battlefield, thus allowing for Gadrak to get online relatively quickly. Keep in mind that Gadrak also makes treasure tokens of its own. Since the deck has a Voltron aspect to it, taking advantage of the commander being a 5/4 flyer for 3 mana, equipment will also help it be able to attack. The deck's running Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots to not only protect it from spot removal, but also to give it haste and start being a true scourge the moment it enters the battlefield. Both can be cast before Gadrak, and if you had already dropped some rocks or artifact lands beforehand, then it can definitely take a chunk out of an opponent very early on. Fire Sheikra makes sure that chunk is significant by giving Gadrak double strike. Unfortunately, this still won't make Gadrak a 2-turn clock since it'll only be giving 10 damage each swing, not reaching the 21 commander damage mark. However, if it has Infect, then 10 damage is a good thing. This is why Grafted Exoskeleton is included in the deck. Even if Gadrak doesn't have double strike, it's still a 2-turn clock with just Infect. Even then, it might still be chump blocked, which is why the deck is also running Loxodon Warhammer and Shadow Spear. Both of these equipment are relatively cheap to cast and both give Trample and Lifelink as well as a boost to power. Lifelink is important here since the deck goes tall and not wide, leaving us potentially susceptible to swarm strategies, but I'll soon discuss how the deck handles those swarm situations later on. In order to further boost Gadrak while also making sure it gets through and also protecting it as well, the deck's running Sword of Body and Mind, Sword of Feast and Famine, Sword of Fire and Ice, and Sword of Sino and Steel. I found that these are the best swords for the deck, not just because of the +2/+2 making Gadrak a 3-turn clock, but because of the relevant protection and effects. Sword of Body and Mind helps in making a chump blocker as well as disrupting opponents by mulling them for 10. Blue and green are 2 of the most common colors in Commander, so the protection is exceptional. Sword of Feast and Famine is busted because it untaps all of our lands as well as disrupting opponents by making them discard a card. Sword of Fire and Ice can ping for 2 more damage or kill off a Hate Bear or Mana Dork, which is great for triggering Gadrak at the end of our turn. We also draw a card off of it too. Sword of Sinew and Steel help in destroying an artifact or a planeswalker that doesn't even have to be controlled by the defending player, so you can get rid of those cards from someone else you can't reach with Gadrak. We can also make Gadrak dangerous with Fiendish Duo and Fiery Emancipation. The former doubles the damage our things do while the latter triples it. This is great since they compound onto things like Double Strike instead of being redundant. Not only will these help Gadrak deal way more damage, but they also help with our burn spells dealing more damage. These burn spells are used to clear the board in order to have Gadrak create those tokens at the end of our turn. Anger of the Gods, Flame Break, Slag Storm, and Sweltering Suns deal 3 damage to all creatures for 3 mana, which is great at wiping the board of Weenies, Mana Dorks, Hate Bears, and other 3 toughness creatures, while also leaving Gadrak alive since it has a toughness of 4. Although tokens dying don't trigger Gadrak, these are also good to wipe the board of Weenie token swarms that might overtake us by numbers. Pyrohemia is also great at picking off loads of creatures. If Gadrak has protection from red, then we can activate it with Total Abandon since Gadrak won't take any damage from it. It also hits players too, which is great for finishing off opponents. Granted, we also take damage, but we'll be okay if Gadrak has lifelink. With enough treasure tokens, we can enter the evil phase of the deck, which is making sure opponents can't recover before we take them out of the game. The deck's running Joko Hops, Obliterate, and Devastation. Since Gadrak is so cheap to cast, if at any time we have enough mana to cast any of these spells and leave enough mana in our mana pool to recast Gadrak afterwards, we'll be the only ones with anything on the board, that being Gadrak. Then, at the end of our turn, we're going to get a ton of treasure tokens for all the non-token creatures we destroy during our turn. These treasure tokens will not only allow us to keep casting spells during our next turn, but they also allow Gadrak to attack into empty boards afterwards. Opponents won't be able to recover as quickly afterwards, so just do some threat assessment and take out opponents in the order of most likely to be a problem to less likely to be a problem. Some other board wipes that aren't so evil are All Is Dust and Vandal Blast. All Is Dust gets around indestructible, and if you're able to cast this and then Gadrak afterwards, you can also get a ton of treasure tokens. What's great about this is that if you get to keep your artifacts. Vandal Blast makes it so your opponents don't keep their artifacts. This can not only hinder artifact-reliant decks, but also decks that use mana rocks as mana acceleration. For spot removal, the deck is running Chaos Warp because unfortunately there are not a lot of ways to deal with enchantments in mono red, so being able to take out any permanent at instant speed, even if they're indestructible, is quite clutch. Another way the deck gets around creature destruction is something mentioned in the beginning, vehicles. If for any reason you don't have enough artifacts to attack with Gadrak, then you can use it to crew vehicles. The deck is running 11 vehicles. Beaters that Gadrak can crew right away are Aradara Express, Demolition Stomper, Heart of Kiran, Renegade Rider, Mizium Tank, and Untethered Express. The vehicles can really apply pressure onto opponents early on, especially before Gadrak is able to attack. Even then, when Gadrak can attack, they can still be crewed by the other creatures in the deck. These creatures aren't used to attack, so they're great at crewing vehicles, but we'll see them later on. Mizium Tank is a beast in this deck because there's plenty of non-creature spells in it. Enchanted Carriage is one vehicle on the deck that creates its crew when it enters the battlefield. These mouse tokens can then be used to crew better vehicles, serve as chump blockers, or sacrifice fodder for other effects. At the very least, they can crew the carriage. Weatherlight and Smuggler's Copter are used for card advantage since the copter loots when it attacks or blocks. Weatherlight improves our draw by digging 5 cards deep and getting us a historic card out of those 5. 37% of the deck is artifacts, so you're bound to get one, but there's also 4 legendary non-artifact cards in the deck, so you can get any of those too. Sky Sovereign console flagship can snipe creatures or planeswalkers when it enters the battlefield or attacks, so it's helpful in killing this off during our turn. It's also a 6/5 with flying, which is something to scoff at. The final vehicle of the list, Conqueror's Galleon, is a great blocker at 210. However, when combat ends, it transforms into Conqueror's Foothold, a land with 4 relevant abilities. We can loot, draw a card, or recover a card from our graveyard. This land is amazing since it helps us when we run out of steam, but we can also recover our burn spells and board wipes with it too, as well as any key equipment or combo piece. The combo being referred to here is that, if we achieve this during our turn, we can generate infinite treasure tokens, which can then be sunk into Pyrohemia or casting a bunch of expensive spells to wipe the board but recovering our things like I mentioned earlier. Mirror Retriever, Salvager of Ruin, Scrap Trawler, or Junk Diver are an important part of this combo since they can be used to recover artifacts, which can include any of the other ones of these. They're also artifacts and cheap to cast, which means that they can also help Gadrak attack, help crew vehicles, and also chump block in a pinch. The other main part of the combo is Quark-Clan Ironworks and Ashnet's Altar. The Ironworks function with any artifact, not just these artifact creatures, but they're the important part of the combo. That being said, the Ironworks are great at sacrificing treasure tokens for 2 colorless mana instead of 1 mana of any color. The Altar works similarly with these artifact creatures because they can be sacrificed to it for being creatures. So any of these altar effects work with this combo. So let's see how this combo works. Let's say we have Jorah's Familiar, Ashnod's Altar, Mirror Retriever, and Scrap Trawler on the battlefield. Keep in mind that some of these can be used interchangeably with the other combo pieces like the Altar for the Ironworks, the Familiar for Cloud Key, etc. Sacrifice the Mirror to the Altar to get 2 colorless mana. Its trigger at this point is moot unless you already had an artifact in your graveyard. Then you sacrifice Scrap Trawler to the Altar to get 2 more colorless mana. Its trigger resolves, sending the mirror to your hand. Use 1 mana to cast it. Sacrifice it to the Altar to get 2 colorless mana and return the Trawler to your hand. Use 2 mana to cast it. Now you can sacrifice the Trawler to get the mirror back to your hand and 2 more colorless mana. And herein lies the infinite loop. Each of these dying gets the other into your hand. This generates infinite colorless mana and infinite non-token creature death triggers for Gadrak to make infinitely many treasure tokens at the end of your turn. If you have Perverse God of the Forge on the battlefield, this can win on the spot. What's great about these pieces is that they all work together on their own within what the deck is doing. These artifact creatures not only assemble an infinite combo, but on their own work to reduce mana cost, generate mana, and recover artifacts from the graveyard. Although I don't include them in my own build, you can, if you wanted to, include spells like Fireball to sink that X damage to kill the table. The deck does have other ways to recover artifacts like Goblin Welder and Goblin Engineer. The Engineer is a bit more restrictive, but at least it entombs an artifact when it enters the battlefield. It also costs mana to activate, but it's just 1 red mana. Buried Ruin returns an artifact to your hand, but you lose the land. At least it's on a mana-producing land, so it doesn't take up a slot in the deck. Elixir of Immortality shuffles itself along with your graveyard into your deck, and you gain 5 life for your troubles. It might not seem that useful, but the deck does have a couple of wheels, plus if we're blowing up the entire board, we might need to recover our things in grindier games. Scrap Mastery not only serves as a recovery spell, but a board wipe as well. It essentially swaps out artifacts on the board for those in the graveyards, so this is a good vengeance card for anyone who overloaded a Vandal Blast against us or anyone who wiped the board of artifacts. The Ready Scrap Savant also has an effect like Goblin Welder, but he has to lose 2 loyalty for it. However, his +2 is very useful for drawing up to 2 cards, the caveat being having to discard the same amount of cards first. His emblem is not entirely necessary in the deck and it will take a lot of work to achieve, but once you do, you don't have to worry about all of your artifacts getting blown up. However, the Ready's main function is welding artifacts and looting. Now, the Ready isn't the only way we run out of steam either. The deck is running Thrill of Possibility, Tormenting Voice, Faithless Looting, and Wild Guess. These are the quintessential looting spells and they work wonders in getting cards fast for cheap. Even if we have to discard some artifacts for it, we can always recover them later, so in a sense, it's even more helpful. Wheel of Fortune and Reforge the Soul are included to help refill our hand when we're down to 0 cards. They also help to disrupt opponents by wheeling away anything they're keeping in their hands. Skull Clamp is the final piece of equipment in the deck. Sure, it can make Gadrak 1 stronger, but it's used more for drawing cards. When we attach it to a creature we're going to sacrifice in order to get 2 cards, or attach it to a 1 toughness creature in a pinch. In fact, the deck is running Kirkkeep and Dwarven Mine to get weak tokens onto the battlefield. Not only do they function as chump blockers in a pinch, but as fodder for Skull Clamp or Ashnod's Altar. The rest of the deck is just the lands. The deck's running all 5 fetch lands, Ancient Tomb, Temple of the False God, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, and the previously mentioned 20 snow-covered mountains. I include snow basics in case opponents run anything that benefits us for it, but this time we're the ones running extra planar lands, so this also helps in not giving that buff to opponents not running any snow-covered lands. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Gadrak the Crown-Scourge. Gadrak has plenty of ways to build around, especially when it comes to mono-red Artifacts Matters decks. However, I chose to go a Voltron route that also includes vehicles like I mentioned in my Core Set 2021 set review video. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link, that also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I'm Demented Kirby, and happy brewing.